So I grew up in around tornadoes, and some of you may have as well. And when you grow up around tornadoes, you learn how to respond quickly to sirens and other things like that. And that served me well until I moved to the Gulf Coast. And when I moved down to the Gulf Coast, I learned that there's a whole different thing around hurricanes. And by the time August 2005 rolled around, I had evacuated my family and my stuff 4 times for various hurricanes that didn't ever come ashore where we lived. So in August, there was news about a new hurricane coming, and I decided that we just weren't going to evacuate this time because all the others had not ever materialized. Bad parenting decision. So we rode out Katrina, we watched all the things that were coming, and to be very, very honest, it was challenging watching all of the stuff unfold around us. Now, we were actually in pretty good shape, but we looked around and said, you know what, somebody's got to do something. There's all this disaster unfolding, there's people in dire need, but somebody has to do something, and it didn't seem like anything was happening. In fact, we were looking around for the organizations that normally respond to that kind of stuff, and it was like everybody was just gone. We weren't seeing any of the relief agencies in there. We couldn't figure out who's in charge of what. And that was the basic question that happened during a crisis, is who is supposed to be doing what? People had needs, they were looking around, but they couldn't find the right person to take care of the right thing. And part of what we discovered as we were watching that and working through all that was that when people go into a time of crisis, they really begin to function in a little bit different way than they normally would. And it's really something that's happening within their brain, because oftentimes you have leaders who have learned great skills and great abilities. They've become very refined. They've got a filter to where when normalcy is happening, they're a great leader. But when crisis comes, they begin to devolve all the way down to potentially the point to where it's fight or flight. A couple of guys out of Australia wanted to do a deeper dive on that. So they did the study on what senior leadership does in times of crisis. And what they found was that senior leadership would look at all the organization around them, and because there were so many people that could be involved, they would step back and not engage what was going on. Now, the study also looked at people who were not senior leadership to see what they did, and they were kind of watching senior leadership and looking around, and they had a little bit different response than senior leadership. They didn't step back. They took a little bit more of a protective stance. And so what happened during this time was that nobody was really doing anything. It wasn't just Katrina. This is a trend that often happens in major crises. And so as we look at this, it creates a whole other thing for the people who are going through the crisis, because for them, time slows down. You may have been in a situation like that. Some of you may remember after the terrorist attacks on 9/11, the president was hurried away somewhere else, and for about 10 hours, we didn't hear from the leader of the country, and it created another crisis on top of that. So it's the crisis they're experiencing in the second crisis. So why are we talking about this in this particular talk? Because every organization at some point is going to be faced with some sort of crisis that they have to navigate. And so as we're working with leaders in organizations, from HR or whatever, we need to be sure that we talk about this. Talk about it with your point leaders. Ask them how they have responded when they've been in crisis before, whether it's a personal crisis or some other crisis, because you'll get clues on how they're likely to respond in other things. Number 2, you need to expect it. It may be a branding crisis. It might be a natural disaster. It might be something else. It might be a shooting. But the reality is that the organizations we work with are very likely to experience some sort of crisis and have to navigate that. And the third thing that you need to do is to allow it. And what I mean there is you need to allow your organization to flex and to change and adapt and respond to what's going on. So back to 2005 in late August. And so I was sitting in my office, and my boss came in. And he looked at me and he said, you know what, this is horrible. Everything that's going on, we were watching on TV, people stranded on bridges. You saw it. You remember what was going on. And he said the same thing over and over again. He goes, somebody's got to do something. Somebody's got to do something. And eventually he says, Matt, you've got to do something. I said, but I'm not in charge of this thing. I'm not the leader. He goes, I know I'm the leader and I have a role. But I want to give you the resources we have, and I want you to combine them with the resources that you have. And together what we'll be able to do is a lot of different things. And through that we had a shopping center with a grocery store that was empty. We had connections to a trucking company that was running up and down the East Coast, gathering supplies and bringing them down. And through a friend of mine, we had access to about 100 different Penske trucks and vans, to where we were able to take all those supplies coming down the East Coast through the grocery store and distribute them to people who were in great need during that time. And when it's all said and done, we moved about $10 million worth of relief supplies during that time when people were in crisis. And that was significant. That made a big difference. And eventually the other organizations got together there. But the reason that we were able to do the things that we were able to do is because we had talked about it and we were willing to be open and flexible and let the org chart not be the limitation that created even another crisis on top of that crisis. Thank you for your time.